Another gorgeous day in the sunny south. As you can tell by my beautiful, beautiful hairdo. Okay, second day of 3 for 10. I promise I will keep it. Yesterday kind of blew up. I'm not sure why. It's just a good movie. Yeah, I probably talked for a while. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so today, 3 for 10. We're talking about The Fall. I guess it's the second of 3 for 10. Actually, I paid full price for the Night Moves. Probably cost me $22. $22 in like 2001 $2001. That's a lot of money, you know that is. Okay, so this is a movie by Tarsem Singh. He at the time just went by Tarsem. I guess he thought, getting Westerners to wrap their heads around the idea that people from South Asia actually have two names and they don't know how to spell Singh. And oh man, I can't imagine the grief this guy has gone through. Yeah, it's great. It's a Googly Films production. That's great. Because he talks, it's a story, and so there's the great Googly Moogly. This is kind of like a sort of wilder, I think more, I don't want to say more creative, but more risk-taking version of The Princess Bride, basically. And it's a story within a story. So if you remember The Princess Bride, the film, I'm thinking of pretty, although I'm not a William Goldman fan, so I never was able to struggle my way through the book. At the same time, yeah, okay, whatever. But you remember, there's the framing narrative is the boy who's ill, and the Peter Falk character, or the grandfather, comes to read to him, and he begins to read the story of Princess Buttercup and so on, and there's actually a really interesting film about that. It's a meta text called Congress, and it was based on a novel by Stanislav Lem. Lem is a famous Polish science fiction writer, probably the most famous Polish science fiction writer there ever has been. And he wrote famously Solaris and a number of other, he wrote a lot. I mean, he's a prolific writer. And it's not to my taste, but it's European science fiction of a particular era. It's very philosophical, and it's political, philosophical. It reads like a lot of sort of late mid-century, 60s sort of political criticism. Anyway, Lamb is an interesting guy. Was an interesting guy, and he wrote these. Stories or the novels are amazing. They're really not. I never found the stories very compelling. I was like, okay, that's it. The ideas are quite something. I mean, the ideas are really something. So Solaris is this famous, probably he's the most famous of the Lem novels. But he wrote a book called The Siberiad, I think. Yeah, The Siberiad, and it's about a virtual Congress, basically. But he wrote it a lot before there was a virtual environment. Right? So anyway, what happens is that the Robin, what is her name? Robin Wright. Is the actor Robin Wright playing herself, Robin Wright, in the movie The Congress, and it's partly animated, partly real life, whatever, not animated. It's a film. It's not real life. It's like saying something. It's like it's on stage, so it's real. It's like okay, whatever you say. Okay, I want to know that if they all get killed at the end of Hamlet, that's the end of Hamlet. Like, we don't, no more Hamlet after that. You'll never see Hamlet again. Not with those actors anyway, because they're all dead. Except for Fortinbras, I guess it is. Or is that, oh, jeez, I can't remember. Anyway, it's Fortinbras, right? Because then Malcolm comes in at the end of Macbeth. Yeah. Anyway. So sweep gold cobwebs out of the attic of the brain. So get your brooms. I can just imagine a great Disney song of that, all the little birds, sweeping the cobwebs out of your brain. That'd be great. Off with the cobwebs. Let's never see them again, etc. Anyway, this is why they say don't quit your day job, Tim. Yeah, that's right. In the Congress, in this movie, the Congress is just the Siberia. Robin Wright is playing herself, and she's getting to an age where basically she won't be hireable anymore. And Hollywood knows it, and so they send Danny Huston, and Danny Huston is a really fine actor. Oh my God, this guy's been overlooked. He's in Silver City, which is this John Sayles movie, which is just a serious attack, savage attack on the George Bush 2000 run for president, and Danny Huston is the correspondent journalist who's going to figure out what's going on. And I'm trying to remember who plays the George Bush character. Oh, it's Chris Cooper, and he does a wonderful job. Oh man, David Paymer, I think it is, plays the handler, the sort of Karl Rove character, and he's just disgusting and as slimy as ever, but he really knows what he's doing. Or is it Richard Dreyfuss? It's Richard Dreyfuss. Oh man, he's good. It's just such a well done film. Silver City, you can't go wrong with John Sayles. You really can't go wrong. I could sit here and talk about every one of his films, and I'll pick a couple. I mean, Brother from Another Planet was an early one, but Lone Star is my absolute favorite. I mean, it's just such a beautiful film. You can even see. I think I put Men with Guns. Anyway, John Sayles. I will talk about John Sayles, but Silver City is sort of one of the funny ones, and it's about a mine has been a polluter, basically, that's been polluting in Texas, and it's about the Native Sons' run for president from Texas, and so it's clearly the Bush 2000 election. Anyway, Danny Huston is one of the main characters in that, and he does a phenomenal job. He's very good, and he's just a good actor. But he plays his complete Hollywood sleaze, and it's just disgusting. And he convinces her that she should allow herself to be recorded completely as a 3D artifact, and that her voice will be recorded. And in doing this, she will then give up the rights to use her own likeness. So she can no longer act. She cannot act at all. So she has to give it up completely. She can't act on the stage. She can't do anything. She has to give it up. And she and her family, she has, I think, a couple of kids that she's just living with. She lives with her kids. There's no father in the picture, or mother, or other significant other, male, female, other in the picture. And she's concerned about her kids, and they sort of move from one kind of, they're sort of living in this, it's sort of sometime in the near future, so things are kind of falling apart, and she's moving around. And so she sees this as, as a way to basically maintain some kind of life. She's concerned one of the kids is not well, I think, and she's concerned about that, and they need treatment. It's not sort of a life-threatening thing, but it's an ongoing issue, and she's concerned. So she agrees, and they fully map her and make her virtual. And then the story follows her into the virtual world. It follows the character. So the rest of the film, like half the film, is her and her family. The other half of the film is animated, where she goes in, and there's this great scene at the beginning. She's going into the Siberiad, which is a meeting of virtual beings. It's the first meeting of virtual beings. And as she's going down the hallway, when she's going down the hallway, she passes actual posters of her other self, basically. So there's a poster of The Princess Bride, and there's a poster of I can't remember the other films that she was in. I wasn't really a Robin Wright fan particularly. I know people liked her or whatever in was it West Wing? No, that's all right. But the one with American Gigolo, the one with Kevin Spacey where he's the presidential killer. It's like I just found that dull. But anyway, and so I was like, and then so this movie is similar to that, but the story is much more gritty, and it's similar to Princess Bride, but much grittier and much more interesting and beautiful. The design is just gorgeous because the designer was Eiko Ashoka, and Eiko was a famous Japanese designer. Oh my God, this woman had such a brain on her. She just was fearless in her design. She there's this huge book which came out must have been in the mid '90s called Eiko by Eiko. I don't know if it's still available. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's going for $1,000 on your sort of typical used books website. But if you can just look up Eiko, Eiko, she was a Japanese designer. She designed for Parco, which was a huge Japanese department store chain, very high end, like Holt Renfrew or even like Saks, or higher end than that. Not Bloomingdale's, like high end, sort of Rodeo Drive type stuff. And she did, film ads, and she did print ads, and she designed lines, and oh wow. And the design is just fearless. It is astonishing. And she has, at one point, on the cover is a picture of Faye Dunaway with two Japanese twins. And so Faye Dunaway is made up in complete sort of kabuki-inspired makeup with this incredible sort of postmodern kimono sort of thing. Looks like it's made of steel and silk and everything like that. And she's holding the hands of these two twins. And it's just spooky and amazing. And wow, you look at it and you think, wow, there is somebody whose brain just works so differently. And it's just so astonishing. Some of the ads it was sort of the beginning of the ads for just the thing. It was just really, they were ads that brought attention to the brand, but they weren't actually advertising a thing. And Nike was doing this at the same time. I mean, there was a move towards brand advertising in the mid 80s. Kind of started with the Ridley Scott hammer thrower for Apple, for why 1984 wouldn't be 1984 anymore. If somebody has shown you that Ridley Scott ad, right, just put in Apple Super Bowl Ridley Scott hammer thrower or something like that, and you'll get it. It's a sort of why 1984 won't be like 1984. And it's typical Ridley Scott brilliance. And so there's sort of, but even there, it ends with an actual image of the object, like this, you will buy an apple. But Eiko was way beyond that. She's like, check this out. And she had these, models swimming past and in slow motion and doing things like that. Was it Parco? It was just an ad for Parco. But it was really to get Parco's name. It was about brand identity. Anyway, she was a genius. So she designs this film. So everything in it is amazing. So this mask, for instance, that the hero wears. I know that looks like a woman's face behind it, but actually it's not. Well, actually, it is. That's right, because he has a different mask on. But so it's all so quintessentially Japanese. There are these huge banners at one point, and they're just the. Oh man, the sort of the spectacle of it. It all happens in deserts. And it is beautiful. So the framing narrative is that Katinka, who is a little girl who is Greek, I think, or is she from Cyprus? Katinka, yeah. And it's 1920s in LA, and she's in the hospital because she's 5, and she was picking oranges because they're broke. I mean, the family is broke, and so everybody works. And she falls off a ladder and breaks her arm. So there she is in this hospital, and she's got her arm up. And this is, to set things have changed enormously, but it's actually surprising that she's ambulatory, because often if you had a broken limb, you had to they put the limb, you'd see the limb like hanging up, and that's it. You couldn't move around. Like, it was making a plaster cast. The casts were heavy because they were made of actual plasters. You're lugging around, 30 pounds, 40 pounds of plaster. You couldn't do it. So in this case, she's got this thing on, and it's summer, so it's hot, right? And so here's this kid who's suffering, and she's got this cast on it. It has a spoke or a strut, which again was common to casts until they began to produce these lightweight casts or inflatable casts, which we now have. Even so, they're still obviously you don't want to be in one of these things. So she's in this, and so her arm is perpetually up like this, and she's a little girl. She's a very genuine little girl. She's not some cutie pie sort of little Dakota Fanning, Elle Fanning when they were or Drew Barrymore when she was 5. They're not like that. She's a little girl, and she's very intriguing. She has a little box full of things that are sort of her best things, and they include a picture of her house, which was burned. It turns out, so they were burned out. Something happened, and a button, and the kinds of things that you picked up as a child and you put in your box, and because you didn't have anything, right? So somebody gave you a little old cigar box, and you carried that around, and you kept all your beautiful objects in it, a piece of sea glass, and it's a wonderful creation. And so Katinka wanders around. She's bored, and she wanders around in the hospital, and she has to heal, so she can't work. And she wanders past the room where Lee Pace is. Now, Lee Pace, you may know from *Halt and Catch Fire*. He plays one of the sort of interesting characters. It's an interesting little show. I like the first 3 seasons. I wasn't able to stay with it for the 4th season. I was like, yeah, okay. At this point, they're kind of done in some ways, but it was interesting. The early days of computing, early days of online. Moving online, and you can see things developing, and it's the way that women moved out of the shadow of men and began to find a place for themselves, and then a queer man who begins to run a technology company. And okay, so Lee Pace plays that character, and he's good. He's so this is a young, this is now, how old is this thing? Oh my goodness. 2006. So it's only 14 years old. So it's in there. It's like this happened yesterday. Well, 2 days ago. And so she passes this room, and then she passes it by again, and she eventually comes in. And there's this character sitting there, and he is suicidal. He's been hurt in some unclear at that point, unclear what has happened to him. And he sees her, and he says, "Do you want me to tell you a story?" And she's nervous. So she comes in the door, and she sits just inside the door. And it's this beautiful, he can't get, he's sitting up, and he can't move. And he says, "Do you want to hear a story?" And she says, "Okay." And he tells her a story about Alexander. And it's gorgeous, and it's designed as there's what if a Japanese designer could design, what Alexander's costumes would have looked like, and it's just amazing. And so there's, he says, and he tells the story of Alexander in the Colosseum. And so it starts off there, and she says, "Well, what was he doing there?" Because her English is rough. And he says, "What do you mean, what was he doing?" "Okay, well, wait, it didn't start there." And then, they're in the desert. And because wherever he shifts the story to, the film goes there. So it's a metatext, right? So he's telling the story, and you're going to see what he says. So it's, and he's going, because she's listening, she puts him in the character of the hero. So he becomes our hero in the story, but not in the external story, right? And so then he says, then he tells the story of Alexander. It's down at the bottom. This incredible dude. This amazing desert. Oh, wow. And there are all these incredible costumes. And then he has, there's no water. And he's sent a runner, a horse rider, a messenger for water, can't find water. And he empties the water into the desert. And she says, "Why would he do that?" And so he stops telling the story. And then you're back in the room with the two of them. And he says, "Why? What do you mean, why would he do that? Because if you can't drink, you must die." And she's like, "No, each to give a little bit, just a little bit, some water." And she's like, "Why would you do that?" So he has this sort of romantic ideal, and she's like, No, you wouldn't do that. That's not how the story goes." And so it's very similar to the idea of when you tell a story to a child. The child is like, "Well, does it have to go that way?" You're like, "Well, no. How do you want it to go?" And they're like, "Well, I want this to happen." You're like, "Oh, Okay, well, sure, that can happen. Then what happens next? And so the story becomes a co-created item, basically. So it's beautifully, beautifully shot. I mean, Singh was I think he was a Bollywood director, but I think he mostly made music videos. So it has the beautiful look of this sort of music video. So dreamy and sort of, I don't mean it's like it's got Vaseline on the lens as they used to do, but it doesn't have a bunch of smoke in it. I don't mean that, but the images are just astonishing and mind blowing, and you're like, wow, that's, ooh. They're just so fantastical. The person who comes closest to this is probably Fellini. And when I say Fellini, some people are going to be going, "Oh my God, Fellini! I want to see it." It's like, no, they're not grotesque at all. So it turns out that the character, whose name I can't remember, Roy. That's right, Roy, has also had a fall. And was it deliberate or was it, what's happened? And it turns out that he has fallen in love with. There were many falls. Basically, he has fallen in love with. He's a stuntman, a movie stuntman, and he's fallen in love with the leading lady. But has she rejected him, or is he too lowbrow, basically, because he's just a stunt guy, so he can't get interested? Did this cause him to fall? Is this why he's paralyzed? What is the paralysis anyway? He appears to be paralyzed from the waist down, and so on. And the gotta keep up the flow here. And Katinka has also had this fall, but her fall is like her fall is the fall of the working poor. His fall is the fall of somebody who essentially he's also desperate. So the two of them get together, and so then she gets closer to him. She says, "Why don't you bring your chair over?" So she gets closer, and they become friends. And as they become friends, he begins to tell her the story of the prince going, of course, to find the princess. And because she's gonna she's gonna tell him what kind of story she wants to hear, and Katinka knows what she wants, and like most 5-year-olds, she's not uncertain. So he says, "What do you have in your box?" So basically, over the course of the time, you begin to learn more about him and more about her, and because you never really see her family. There's a beautiful moment early on in the film where they've closed the door to the room, although it's open because it's California, it's warm, and there are oranges. I mean, it's beautiful, and the the keyhole in the door makes the room into a camera obscura. So if you remember, there are two types of camera, basically. There's the camera lucida, which has been reduced to being called a Lucy. Back in the days of advertising for a long time, it was just called a Lucy, which was basically something that allowed you to resize an image. So you would look through a little lens, and you could resize an image and draw it. So there was a series of mirrors, basically. So you would point the mirror at an image. The image would appear in the lens. You would put your hand down and draw over the image that you saw through the lens, and you could draw it at whatever size you liked. So it would embiggen, as we would now say, but it would either maximize or minimize. You could change the size of an image. This is before Xeroxes, remember, and before. Well, cameras were expensive. Taking a shot like that with a stat camera, a photostat camera, was expensive. So, yeah. That's the camera lucida. And they think there's been an argument that Van Eyck used these. Oh, sorry, not Van Eyck, Vermeer. And so on. There's a whole bunch of discussion about this. The discussion, if you're interested in this, the sort of history of the camera lucida, which is enormous, I would start with the David Hockney discussions of, Hockney is a famous painter. I'm not a fan, but anyway, it's just like hockey, except with an N and a Hockney. Anyway, so have a look, and there's a film called Tim's Vermeer. It's not me, but it's about a guy who actually, to understand a Vermeer painting, actually builds the room that Vermeer would have painted and lights it appropriately and so on. Another whole discussion. Vermeer, okay, it's another whole discussion. If you're interested in Vermeer's technique, You might see Girl with a Pearl Earring, which is not a bad picture at all of the influence of the patron and the subjugation, basically, of the artist, and talks about Vermeer's process, and it's played by one of those British dudes, not Nigel North, I can't remember. Anyway, the guy who plays Mr. Darcy in the Bridget Jones, whatever. Not a bad actor. It's okay. Always plays the same character. Whatever. So that's the camera lucida. The camera obscura is where you are yourself inside the camera. So the room is the dark room, and you make a small hole, and then you basically the image that comes from outside bounces through the hole and is reversed, and on the back wall of the room is essentially, which is the back of the camera, you will get the image perfectly rendered because it's come through a little lens. I mean, the hole that you make in the wall, or in this case the keyhole, produces a lens and it inverts the image. So you draw whatever the image is upside down on a huge piece of paper. Depending on how big the chamber is, the back wall determines how big the image is going to be. And then you reverse it and you've got a perfect image of whatever it is that's outside. Okay, fine. Well, there's this moment, and so you want a smaller image, a smaller chamber, right? And after a while, they were like, let's put some photosensitive film on the back wall. Oh, and then the photosensitive film is exposed to the light and it etches the film. Then you take film away and you get rid of the stuff that's been etched out, and it leaves behind image, hey, photograph. So the camera obscura is a visual system which is used by artists and architects, all kinds of people, to get an actual accurate depiction, because the physics of the light are making the thing accurate, right? The lens, basically, that's the keyhole. So this happens at one point. They close the door, and the sun is bright, and it brings an image of the motor car. There's a motor car, very expensive motor car that's outside, and through the keyhole, and it's inverted on the back wall, and they both watch it. So they're in a film watching basically film, and it's 1920, so it's really the beginning of the film industry. Although, yeah, I know. The film industry had been running already for 20, 30 years, but really it was about to become the massive medium that it would be. Okay, so that kind of thing happened in the film, but most of the film is spent in one of two stories, either between Roy and Katinka, and discovering who they are and how they know each other and so on, and their various different struggles. Her struggle to rejoin the family because she wants to work for the family, because that's her place in the family, is to work and to assist the family in it. And his job, which is to get back to film. Well, actually, he doesn't think he's ever going back to film, and he wants to commit suicide. And so he eventually, you begin to understand that he's befriended Katinka partly because he's bored and but he's also desperate, and he wants her to bring him morphine so that he can kill him, sufficient morphine so that he can kill himself. So he has to get close enough to her so that she sees him as a friend, but then of course he's going to kill himself. Well, you can't put that on a kid, right? So as that goes on, he tells her the story of the hero, the gunman, the lone gunman who has this mask, and they go through the various different adventures in the desert, and occasionally she shows up, but most of the time and he gains these sort of friends who will help along the way, and it's very much like Baron Munchausen. There's somebody who can run 1,000 leagues, and somebody who can see everything, and so they all have these sort of magical abilities, and it's very much a magic story. And as he tells the story, she populates it because it's a co-told it's a co-told tale that both of them tell the tale together. And as he tells the story, so they're at one point, I don't know if you've seen these step wells in India, but they're amazing. And so they're built hundreds of years ago. Sometimes I think some of them are actually 1,000 or more years old. and they're remarkable. They go down. They dig deep wells, and they have steps that go down on all sides. So a number of people can go into these step wells at the same time. They're big. And the thing is that they dig steps all and build steps with clay bricks basically all the way down. So the water level rises and falls, and you can always step down to the lowest level of the water. That's why they're called step wells. So you step into them and you have to walk down a number of steps. They're beautiful looking. Down at the bottom is this pool of water, which of course wouldn't have been, I mean, they're now, I think they still use, I think in some communities they still use these step wells. They're remarkably visually, and so she, at one point, there's a scene and they're all the bad guys are always chasing them, and the bad guys are all perfectly symmetrically arrayed in one of these step wells, and you're like, oh, and then they start running up and down the wells because they're up the staircases because they're chasing the good guys, and so there's this amazing, oh wow, and the bad guys are all dressed in the radiation garb that the people are using then. So they would have been, this is early radiation X-rays basically, and they didn't know what to protect and how to protect. I mean, they didn't know anything about X-rays really. They just knew that radium would kill you, which they learned from Marie Curie. She learned it because she was just so free with radium. Like she was using radium everywhere. It's like, oh Christ! So she died. It's terrible cancer. But anyway, so they have to take X-ray films, and so the process of doing that, ACO has designed for them these incredible sort of leather forms, which have these goggles in them, and these long leather aprons, and they are terrifying. And so she imagines that these are the bad guys, and so they're always chasing after her. And so every time he says something, she populates it with her imagination. And sometimes he describes it, and it happens, and sometimes she imagines it. It's an amazing story. But it's beautiful, right? And you come to really care for Katinka. I mean, she's not just a character. I mean, she actually is. I think she's 7. I think she was 7 when she made the movie, so she's 7 playing a 5-year-old, and she's such a fine little human being. I mean, she's just a great. Oh, she's your hero. You're like, oh, I love Katinka. She's the best. And of course, he has to give up. He has to decide to choose life. And will he do that? Of course he will. He's got Katinka. Why wouldn't you choose life if you got a friend like Katinka? But before that, of course, there has to be a crisis in the narrative, and so there are different crises, and the narrative gets wilder and wilder and crazier and crazier. So it's a beautiful, beautiful movie, and you can see here's the hero. Here's Lee Pace's character here. So he's got this sort of brocaded, marching band, sort of elaborate double-frogged, suit or whatever it is, and he's got this antique dueling pistol, and he has these skirts that he wears, and there's the magic butterflies. I mean, something magic always happens when the blue butterfly appears. And she's wearing a mask, and So and there's this burning. I forgot about this. At one point, so they go to he falls into hard times. He's taken as a slave, and the slaves are put in these wheels where they drive the wheels of the van. So the van is it's a built up carnival wagon sort of thing, but it's the emperor of everything, of course, is in this van, and the slaves are they're actually walking in the wheels, so they're what drives the wheel. The design is gorgeous. You just look at it, you're like, oh, the next, as I joked about some weeks ago, each scene more beautiful than the last if you line them up that way. But they really are truly astonishing. So I cannot recommend enough The Fall, where the fall, of course, are these different falls from grace. And the sort of ways that accident changes our view of things, and the way that the accidents make things fall apart and bring things together, and the things fall together and they fall apart. It's a lovely film and completely captivating, and you got to stick with it. And it's you genuinely were, you're like, I think in both stories, I'm less concerned about one is it's the inner story is like the story that's basically Katinka's imagination of what the story Roy tells her. It's also, of course, about Hollywood, and that's the point. It's also a film about film, a film about art, and a film about visions. Visions of all kinds. So that's the second one of 3 for 10.